We're listening to the Renewal Podcast, a weekly podcast that features interviews and discussions and teaching on various biblical and theological subjects. My name is Colt Robinson, and I'm the lead pastor at Bethel Church in rural South Dakota. And we do this because we believe that our minds are to be shaped and renewed by the life-giving and transforming Word of God through the power of the Holy Spirit. So we pray for the next few minutes that as you listen, that you'll just see Jesus more clearly.
I'm here with Marlana Wallman. Correct me if I say something wrong. Marlana is a member of our church. She just became a member, but she's been attending Bethel Church for some time now, off and on. She's been in Mexico. She goes back and forth. And she just has a really interesting story. And I just want you to hear that. I heard some of it when she became a member in the membership classes and as we met with the leadership in the church. And so, Marlana, just kind of tell us a little bit how you became a believer. Let's just start there, or maybe let's just go even further back and tell us about just growing up. Where did you grow up? And
I grew up in a very lesser known kind of a religion,
okay.
An Anabaptist group called the Hutterites, and they're very traditional. Like they have the old, you could say the old books that the Anabaptist ancestors wrote, and they try to keep those traditions as much as possible. And where they might have had, or they might have had good reason once to separate from the norm of religion, and they might have had, like now it's become something completely different. So for me, growing up was like you don't realize how you're different from everybody else because you're just a kid.
Yeah.
But then, so they live in separate communities, separate from the world, apart from the world. They have in this community, nobody has their own money. They go from that verse in Acts that says the disciples had all things in common. So they don't have their own businesses, their own jobs, their own money. Everything belongs to the colony. And your point of living is to live for the good of the colony. So, it's kind of a life where you grew up with the mindset of, you're taught that you exist for the colony and you do your best to serve the colony. And then as far as salvation, that you don't really know. Like my big question growing up was, how can I get to heaven?
So this is a religious organization, or I mean they live in a community for religious reasons.
Yeah.
And you're saying at one time there was probably a good,
like way back in the history of the church, like in Zwingli and where it was, where the state was bearing down and saying this is the religion you follow, they would have gone. If you think of the Anabaptist history, they were the radical reformers who went way beyond, but still had kind of a good reason and followed their faith instead of, what they thought the Bible taught, and let's not baptize infants, where a lot of the early reformers hadn't yet gone that far.
Right.
So
what was the gospel that you grew up with?
There was none. You could. So this depends a lot on the different communities, because there's a couple of these communities throughout the United States and throughout Canada. So it depends on the community, in the particular colony. But in growing up for me, I never knew the gospel or salvation. I just thought, like I said earlier, how can I get to heaven? It was very much do your best, work, follow all the rules. So it would have been like the dress code. For men, it would be, you have the black pants, no pockets in the back. And for women, it would be, do like you have a set like schedule that you follow to help the community, or your head covering and all of that. And you literally live in fear because you could break one of those rules. It was very, like, you're always worried. You're always saying, like, God is not pleased with me because I'm not doing a very good job. And this is not even talking about what's going on inside of you, knowing, like, everybody does it, in some sense, know that they can't reach, they're not good enough. There's something wrong.
Right.
Like, I think everybody has that sense. Mm-hmm. And if you really look inside of yourself, but this is not even speaking of that. It's just speaking of just outside and trying to, look good. And it was incredible how lost and, how I very much believed how if I do this, then I'm good for today. And, my good deeds will be more than my bad ones. And serving the colony and doing... And, as far as childhood and growing up, it was, you could say fun or peaceful and no worries. And, family structure is strong and, secure families and no problems at home, but very much fear and, like, religiously, if you have a religious mind, like some people, from birth have some kind of that kind of a mind, it can go
right.
And so if there's any religious teaching, they soak it up.
Sure.
And it's very much kind of where I was at.
So good works, following the rules, the law, was a...
And that was when I felt happy with where I was, if I would get into heaven, was when I did all of the things right.
I was listening to somebody the other day, and they were relating a story of, this is not, we look at your story and your upbringing, your context, and say that's just so different than ours, but really it's not. And then this story, he was talking about this young pastor that went to a guy that was on his deathbed, and the guy on his deathbed is saying, I haven't done good enough things. Have you heard this?
No.
It's like I haven't done good enough things, and this young pastor is just trying to reassure him, that what do you mean? You've done great things, and starts listing the things the guy's done. And he says, but if you know me, I could have done more, all the things. And he says, I just haven't given enough. And the guy, and the pastor's like, but you're one of the best givers. You give all the time. You give your time. You give your money. You do all these things. And the guy said, but you don't know my heart. You don't know me. There's times I could have given more and I didn't do it. He's like, I'm just not sure that I'm saved. I'm not sure that I'm a believer. And finally, this young pastor is just trying to convince the guy, that he's a believer, and he can't do it. And he just gets sick to his stomach. He runs out of the hospital and just throwing up. Mm-hmm. And the guy's sister is walking in, and she says, "What's wrong? Did he die?" And the pastor says, "No, he didn't die. I'm trying to, talk to him about his eternal salvation, and he just won't listen. So the sister goes up there and he starts the same thing with her, and he's just, I'm not sure, and I haven't done enough good things. You don't know me. And she's like, but that's the same for all of us. Christ has done these things on our behalf. It's not what we have done; it's what He's done. But I haven't given enough. I haven't. But Christ gave everything because we don't. And just talking about just shooting holes in everything this young pastor, believed about our faith. So my point is, I think sometimes even we should identify with your story to this point, because a lot of us have grown up in a place where we just our assurance is wrapped up in telling ourselves that we've done enough good things.
And he knew that he hadn't, and I think that's kind of goes back to what I said, like deep down, if you really examine yourself, something's wrong, something's missing, there's falling short somehow.
So how did you come to faith then in that context?
Well, I actually heard the gospel on the radio, but that was not supposed to happen, because in that particular culture, they would be the ones who would say no technology. So radios were not allowed, or TVs or any of that. But I got a hold of one somehow, and well, the reason I did was because I loved music, and I think God put that into me whenever we would go to the doctor's office or something. I loved listening to the music and the instruments, and all the singing there in the church and in that community is a cappella, which is pretty, but I love music. And so when I had a little portable radio that you can't listen to it without headphones. That was the antenna.
Yeah.
And then I would, like, to get good service, I would sit under the window, because you can't make sure nobody sees you in the window.
Yeah.
And I would just listen to any kind of thing that came on, and then just anything. Like whenever there was a commercial, I would go on to the next song. Whenever that song was over, and go on to the next song. And then I heard a funny voice one day, and that was a funny accent, and that was Alistair Begg. And this has to be the sovereignty of God, because it could have been anybody teaching any kind of thing. And like I said, like if your mind wants to hear religious things, you'll soak it up.
Yeah.
But by the providence of God, it was a man who's a faithful teacher of the Bible. And I listened as much as I could, sometimes like every day, just listening to him preach the Bible. And he preaches like verse by verse through the Bible. And the difference was that in that community, you have a church service every day, and then twice on Sundays. And they read the old writings of the Hutterite ancestors. And they don't necessarily look at the congregation or look at the culture around you and preach what God has put on their heart, and like from the particular text. They read the whole thing, the whole series of books, and I'm guessing it goes through the Bible, Genesis through Revelation. Then they start over when it's over. And I'm sure there's a lot of good truths in there, but doesn't necessarily. It's in High German, and the dialect is Hutterite.
So could you understand?
Yeah, you understand a little bit, but it's not the language that you speak.
Okay.
So it costs something. Like they say, like
Yeah.
It would cost you a little bit to understand it. Like you have to put your mind to it.
Yeah.
But I think it was just a lot of times what they do with whatever message it is this is how you, then this is what the works that you have to do now. And it's very much bent on, follow the rules of the colony to be right with God. And this was a completely different way of thinking. What the first thing that I remember hit me was what he taught about who God was. The character of God, his attributes. That's not necessarily a big focus that I remember growing up. When I thought of God, I thought of somebody who was very strict, very like not necessarily a father figure, but more of a person who makes the rules and says, do your best. And if you don't do good enough, that's too bad. Instead of the God who makes a way for us to get to him. But it was so life-changing to actually know through those messages through Alistair Begg, who he really was. And that's when I first understood grace. That had not been a word that I grew up with. I did not remember ever.
I like what you've said so far, though, is that you learned about yourself by studying who God is. You know, kind of reminds me of A.W. Tozer's book, The Knowledge of the Holy. The first line is, the most important thing about you is the first thing that comes into your mind when you think about God. You know, to know God is to know who we are in light of that. You know, and so that's, you know, so true, to know who he is. So, I mean, here by the providence of God, you're sitting under the window, you know, listening to these messages on who God is, discovering things about yourself.
And that's exactly what happened. I mean, I realized so many things that whenever, you know, you go every day to hear these messages, and then you think about what you heard earlier in the day through like the true teaching of the word. It was like light and darkness, or the difference was so incredible. Like somebody, and then it did get to that point where the conviction came, that the conviction of sin, and how no matter what I would work for, it would never be good enough. And it comes back to that question, like, how can I ever get to heaven? Once you realize, well, there's nothing you can do, then, you know, that's horrifying. That's like, well, what do I have to look for? But I think that's a good one, how, you know, that's how you know who you are, just from hearing who he is. Yeah.
So was there a specific time, a moment when you placed your faith in? I mean,
was.
You know, how did that?
I had gone through some 3 days of, I know it was 3 days because I remember those days of just heavy conviction of, and I was not, like every act of service I would do, like my chores, my, you know, whatever I was supposed to do, I was lost in, you know, normally when you think of those things that they would put towards being a good person, and it seemed like the Spirit was showing me, you know, if God sees this, he sees filthy rags. And many times I was reduced to tears because, like, while I was doing the act and realizing that God does not accept this as anything good, like literally as I was working, realizing that no, that's not good enough. And at the end of those days, I was completely hopeless, and I was done, and I just got to the end of myself, you know. And then I remember just saying, God, if I can't even ever make it to heaven, you know, you have to do something. And I didn't barely know how to pray, you know, they don't really teach you that. But I just cried out to God, like from the bottom of my being, where I felt the most hopeless was when, you know, I said, you know, there's no reason for me to live if I don't have hope. And then I just saw like in my mind, I saw the cross, and just it's done, and I just grabbed, like I was despairing of life itself, and then I grabbed hold of that cross, and then I believed in Jesus. So, and then he saved me. So, yeah, well.
So, you know, at this point, you've come to faith. You're still in the colony. How long between that point and then when you left the colony? How old were you at this time?
I'm never sure. Let me think about it. Well,
about.
So from there, I knew something was different. I knew something had changed, because I was like I saw the world in a different light. I felt a lot different. I felt like now I had been saved, but at the same time, I was still a product of a lot of wrong thinking and a lot of wrong teaching. And I didn't really have a Bible to read, or the only thing I had was that broadcast. So I was still very could have gone either way.
Yeah.
But I think once God sets His love on you, then He'll do what He has to do. So after 3 months of happiness, you could say, like realizing that that I was saved somehow from something. I started feeling like I should not be there. I was very unsatisfied, a holy dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Just nothing made sense to me. Everything had kind of lost its purpose, and then it was like I kept thinking of running away. And in that teaching, in that community, that's like, well, if you do, you're lost. And so I kind of believed that a little bit.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be lost.
That was big. That was a big decision, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I got to the point where I wrote them a letter, that ministry, saying, I have this dilemma.
And this is Truth for Life by Alistair Begg, right? They'll put that in the show notes, so people can find it.
I wrote them a letter saying, like, how do I know what God really wants me to do with my life? I don't know. And so they wrote a very encouraging letter on, how God calls us. And when He calls us to something, He doesn't just let us go. He enables us. He's the one who guides us and is with us every step of the way. And I eventually got to the point where I said, if you want me to go, if you want me to leave my family and my culture and, go into the great unknown, I believe that you would be with me. So I'll agree to it. But then, as soon as that happened, it went away, like the conviction, the whole, and I was okay again. I was fine where I was at, and I said, okay, that must have been a test that I just passed. I still had that mentality, and so I was fine. And that was, it didn't take long for that everything to come crashing down again. And this time I knew that I had to follow where God was leading, even though I had no idea where it was.
Yeah.
And it might have been either 6 to 7 to 8 months after I believed that I finally came to that point of making the decision, and then I had to tell my parents. And many people, when they leave that culture, they run away. Like, they don't tell their parents because it's a shameful thing. But I thought because of the nature of my reasoning, I had become a believer, that I should tell them. So that was so hard.
How did that go?
Very, like, at this, you feel so bad.
Yeah.
And at the time, I felt guilty too, and I shouldn't have felt guilty for following God. But I felt like I was hurting my parents. It wasn't like, it's not a culture of, you get 18, you turn 18, you can, go on and make your own decisions. That's not that kind of a culture. You're with your parents until you die or until you get married, or,
Sure.
But that was hard, and then I felt so bad. I mean, my little sister was under a year old. That was one of the really, really hard things. My grandma, I was out, very close with her. I still am, but that was so hard. And I don't know how I did it.
Yeah.
Well, I know how I did it, but
Yeah, you just can't help but think of some of those difficult passages in the Gospels. When Jesus makes those statements. If the eager follower, comes up and says, "Hey, you want to follow me? I want to follow you, Jesus." And Jesus says, "Well, I'm not gonna, I don't have a home. You sure you want to do that? And you got to leave your father and your mother if you want to, follow me. You literally did, leave that. So, So, did you have a plan when you
No,
left?
just because I did not have had never wanted to leave and never planned on it, was fine and comfortable where I was. I did not have a plan, which is where God then was able to work. I had some family members who had left the colony, and so like the whole step of the way, like I didn't have anything like money wise or education even, but the whole time, through the process, like God really did see me through, and He did that through people. I mean, helping me, teaching me what to wear in this culture, that kind of thing. Even like financial help, and I would stay with family members and who helped me get a job and get my GED, things like that. I really did not have a plan. I didn't know what to do, and I have my mom's sister, who had years earlier left the same kind of community in Canada. They had left with their entire family because of the same reason that they became believers. She heard about it and invited me to come and stay with them until I figure out what God wants. And that was the plan of God for me. So
you went to Canada.
Yeah, I moved to Canada, not knowing like the whole, there's a visa. I mean, like the whole thing of having a different country and different border, like,
Sure.
you don't realize that until you're actually in the world and you have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, most of us don't even realize, all the visa stuff and all that goes on.
Well, that comes back into play later on in the story.
Yeah.
But,
Okay. So you went to Canada, and that was a great experience, right? For you.
It was. They had. My family in Canada, my aunt and her husband, they're just really sweet people. Just really, people that God has saved and used in a great way in their, strong marriage. They're not perfect by any means. And that's one of the things that God uses to encourage other people, and especially me, because I'm not perfect. If they were perfect, I would be striving to be perfect instead of like realizing that there's room for, like there's grace. And I learned so much from them. And then their oldest daughter, Marita, is my best friend, and we became very close, and knew each other through that. So they were going to a church called Grace Baptist Church, and so that was the first time I had ever gone to any kind of church outside of that, that kind of cultish experience that I had. And it was, a Reformed church, expository preaching, just very solid. Not perfect, but I went there for a while, and then there was I still felt like the outsider. I was just sitting in the corner listening, taking everything in, and it was so strange and different from what I was used to, and I was very much still separate and didn't know what to think. Who are these people? Why are they acting so nice? But I remember we went to a hockey tournament in another province, and the pastor was there. His son was playing, and we just started talking, and he asked me, about what was I thinking as far as, have I ever thought about being baptized? And I said, that's an interesting question. I've thought about it a lot lately.
Yeah.
It's a Baptist church,
Right.
So, and he is Pastor Ernie Platt. He has such a heart for reaching, like the heart of an evangelist, the heart of God, I think. And we started doing a study on baptism and what it really means, and that's kind of where it's like the whole awakening started. And when I realized so many things about first of all, who God was. Like, what is He... Like, what I learned about the local church in that time is, like, the purpose that God has for the local church, like, the whole, the commission of God. He gives that commission to the local church, and then, you know, they go out with the gospel. Instead of where I was formerly from, you know, you were apart from the world, you stay in your community, where the gospel is the opposite. You know, you go into the world. Like Jesus' prayer in John 17, that you would keep them strong in the world, not take them out. But I learned all of that. And then while I was going through that process, Marita gave me a Bible. And it was the first time I'd ever had one. And that was so life-changing.
So how old are you at this time?
I would have been 21 or 21 because I left when I was 20. It might have been around that time. Okay, so I would have turned, at that very hockey tournament, I would have turned 21.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's hard for me, or I suppose people listening, that, you know, that you went through all of this, got to this point in your faith journey, you know, being led out of the Hutterite community and embracing a gospel with no Bible. You know, I mean,
I don't know why I hadn't had one before that. Now that you say it. I could have gotten. Well, maybe I was broke, not having any money. But
and maybe you didn't think of it, because that's not, I mean, obviously you didn't grow up in, I mean, we grow up in households that have, I mean, I would venture to say even most non-Christian households probably have a Bible somewhere, you know.
Well, like you said, I think they had a lot of Bibles and probably just took one to use.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm supposed to buy a Bible. What should I get?
Right.
Well, yeah, but that, I remember, I would just spend hours reading the Bible. One of the things that I did while I was in Canada, I helped, my aunt was homeschooling through, because where they were at the point was where, you know, they want to homeschool their younger kids, but they had a lot of kids, so she needed help, and then, you know, the whole running a household and all of that. So I was happy to help, and she, that gave me such an opportunity, like, to be in the classroom with the kids, and they would be doing their work, and I would just be reading, and then every now and then they would ask me a question, and I would look away and help them, and go right back to, like, reading, and then just hours in my cousin's closet, and then reading. And then one funny thing I remember was the Wheat Kings, as a hockey team, were in the playoffs, and their stadium in Brandon was not big enough, so they had come to Winnipeg with a Jet Stadium, and so they had 2 days of playoffs. And I love hockey, I always have, but we had front row tickets to see them, and I was so, I can't believe it, but like, I remember having, like, I'm studying this baptism study, and I have a Bible. Have fun, I'm staying here. I went the second day, but
Really?
But just, that was kind of funny, where, you know, everyone was like, "You're not coming." It was something that had such a draw, and I could not stay away from it. And then in April, I got baptized. So that was March when I received the study, and then April I got baptized. And then became a member of that church, and
So why didn't you stay there?
that was when the visa thing comes in. So you need a visa to live in another country.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. I guess it was easy to come in for me because I had family members and stuff.
Okay.
But then to live there, you kind of need more paperwork, but I didn't realize that. And we had gone back to the States for a visit and come back to Canada. And at that point I had made that, the whole, thank you, Lord, for bringing me here. I love this church. This is your church and I get to serve in it. You've given me a place in the world where I didn't know anybody and have anything. And this, I found my purpose kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then we're happy to be on my way back to my home, what I had considered, Canada and the church family there. And at the border, they stopped us, and because of me, so we had two vehicles, and the vehicle before us went through, and the third vehicle was myself, my cousin, and her boyfriend, Zach Lowen, and then he was Marita's boyfriend. And we always have a great time, the three of us. But at that point at the border, like something felt wrong, and they took me back to question me, like, what's your purpose here? And they were kind of very harsh and very mean, and I was very, very scared. I didn't understand what was happening or why I was being questioned, like I had not done anything wrong. And I felt so bad for Zach and Marita. They had to stay there. They had to sit there outside and wait. And who knows what's going to happen if... So eventually they had threatened so many things. They even said, like, if we wanted to, we could ban you from this country. And that just devastated me. Like, this is my home. I didn't understand. And then it was like the whole time I didn't understand what was going on. But then I remember thinking, okay, God is sovereign, right? Because this is the stuff that I'm learning in my new church family, in the small groups, the studies, the preaching. Sure. God is sovereign. Okay, so where is God? Like, then I have to,
yeah.
You have to kind of put into action what you really believe in, like the testing of. And I think thinking back, so what happened was they had decided, okay, we're going to ban you for a year. You can't come into Canada this time. And very devastating, but at least it wasn't for life. Yeah. And then, so we called my uncle Wayne, who was in the vehicle before us, and so he dropped his family off and came back.
Okay.
Without sleeping.
Yeah.
And then right at the border, then he picked me up, and then Zach and Marita kept going, went home, and then he took me back to South Dakota. And I felt so, like, it was devastating for me, but I also felt so bad for everybody involved. Like, now he has to do this, and it's all my fault, that kind of thing. And I remember apologizing at one point, like, must have been in the middle of the night, just driving, and he just reassured me. He said, "This is nothing. This is a speed bump on the road of life, and there's going to be a lot of them."
Yeah.
So I've always remembered what he said there, and that has proven true. But then, yeah.
So he took you back to South Dakota. Where in South Dakota?
So my mom's youngest sister in Sioux Falls, in that area, that's where I landed. And now I'm at the point where, what do I do now? Yeah. Where do I go? It was very painful. I still wanted to be there, and
sure.
Didn't understand what was happening. Yeah. And I think being in that house there, my Aunt Benita and her husband Randy and their family are very, God has used them in many ways in my life too. They're they have a kind of a marriage and a ministry.
This is in Sioux Falls.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very much open to the world as far as, how do I say this? I've just been ministered in many, many ways. Like through, I think the first time I heard even before I went to Canada, I remember spending time at their home and hearing these things that they talked about, like like theological terms and things that would just make me so curious. Like, what are they talking about? What and they live a life where their faith is in every part of their, like, everything they do is an act of worship, and living, in the presence of God and in His world, like in their marriage and in their family life, and that's where I landed, and that's one of the things that God, kind of use them to, like, give me kind of a peace that whatever happens, it's
little
still,
stability for the moment.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word. Yeah, like their foundation was grounded on, and so I saw that, and then I ended up going back to where I first was when I left the colony, where another family member who would help me get my first job, and this was in Howard, South Dakota.
Okay.
And I was kind of in between what do I do now? I was in between that and I want to go back. So I thought, okay, my purpose now is to do what I have to do to get a visa, I guess.
Sure.
Because I just wanted to go back so bad. Yeah. And then so we attended a church called Sun Prairie Baptist in Salem, South Dakota.
Okay.
And every Sunday I remember just, not being in the service, not worshiping God, on the Lord's Day. Instead, I would be thinking back, like, what is going on in Canada? I wish I could be there.
Right.
And it's like saying, well, that's not good enough right now, God. I want this.
Right.
And it was I didn't realize how, like, what a problem that was. Like, not being thankful.
Right.
Like, my attitude was very much, pity me, poor me. And I think 3 months later, well, what happened first was the pastor there said, well, we have a youth event. We would like you if you want to participate. And of course, youth event. Let's do this. And I just received so much joy from serving. And God used that to convict me of my attitude. Like, this could have been the whole time, but you were having a bad attitude. and then that brought me to, like, I'm so sorry. Like, just repentance and then saying, God, whatever your purpose is, I trust you in this. And now that I've, of course there's mourning, there's pain, but that has a purpose too. And now just, doing surrendering my life again and saying, my life is yours. Do whatever you want. And that was
so. Just kind of for the sake of time here, how did you get from there to Kenroy and Charlotte's?
Yeah, well, I wanted to get a job, and the best job was in Huron, South Dakota, at the post office.
Okay.
So when I came through a family member, a cousin of my mom's who attends Bethel Church, his wife works at the post office. So through that connection, I started talking to her about working there.
Okay.
And she was helping me with the process. And I came to town that one day, and she was going to help me, but she was going to help me the next day. So I stayed, like, the night in town, like in my car in a parking lot of a store, and the next morning I went out to their farm, and we were doing some computer work, and her husband was like, "So where'd you stay? You're pretty fast," because I didn't come from Howard, and I said, "Well, I stayed in the parking lot at Lewis." And he said, "That's not going to do. We have to get you a place." So he said, "I have a neighbor. Let's go over to meet him." So he gave Kenroy a call, and then maybe half an hour later, he said, "Let's go and see the neighbor." And I said, "Okay."
Yeah.
That was pretty fast. So he took me over there, and I remember driving onto the farm, and he took me over to the shop, and there was Kinroy, and he shook my hand, and he said, "Your room is ready." And I thought, well, shouldn't you ask me some questions, or don't you want to know anything about me? But no, he was like, "No, it's ready. Whenever you want to move in." And I was so shocked and thankful, but just, wow, how, why?
About what year was this, do you know?
I would have been 23.
23.
And then, yeah, because, so I lived there for 3 months, attended Bethel,
Okay.
and then moved to town after I got my apartment in town. But I kept coming to Bethel every chance that I got. So we tried a couple of churches in town, but none of them were what I was looking for. But then kept coming back to Bethel every chance, while I was working in town.
Yeah.
And through that, what I had been learning about, God's heart for the world, and through missions, like I had been praying for the world, certain, different countries, and I had such a heart for the lost people and all that. And after, it wasn't even a year that I lived in Huron and worked there when there's an opportunity to work in Mexico through my church in Canada. And at the time I was still a member there, even though I was...
Sure.
And because of that, they were able to send me to Mexico.
Oh, that's...
And I remember 3 months before I left, 3 months before March, I had quit the job, and then I wasn't sure if it would work out, and I was looking for other jobs, doing other interviews in different cities. But March, my 24th birthday, I was on a plane to Mexico City. I had never been on a plane before. I'd never...
How old are you now, just to kind of put this in...
27.
27, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I could not believe that. I mean, and so they sent me as a missionary through, like, the local church, because I was still a member there, so I was able to...
Sure.
So there was a reason I was still...
Yeah.
Okay, so how long were you in Mexico?
So I first went for 3 months, came back for 3, went back for 6, came back to get a visa,
Yeah.
and that took a while. I think I was probably another 6 months, and then finally got a resident visa. So the last time I was there for a year. So altogether, maybe 2.
Yeah. Okay.
And during that time, you met somebody.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, and he is living in Mexico right now, and you're actually planning a trip to go back down.
Yes.
So what's your future plan here? And so you just became a member at Bethel Church, but your plan is to go into missions.
Well, it is very important for me to, wherever I am, to be in the local church, in it's stupid not to, as if you think of the Christian life and the means of grace that's available, and how you can grow through the preaching of the word, the ministering of the word, the sacraments. And I also promised when I became a member in Canada that if I would ever move, I would be finding a biblical local church. And I was only too happy to become a member at Bethel.
Yeah, and I mean, over the time when you were gone, and I mean, yeah, it's, you were definitely part of Bethel Church before you became a formal member. I mean,
I do know that God has me set apart for missions somehow, somewhere. I know that the particular talents that I have will be used somehow by Him, and it seems like when I first left my culture to go into another culture, and then that culture in another country, and then from here to Mexico, it seemed like, I'm used to kind of experiencing other cultures and seeing certain things in certain cultures where I can relate that to the gospel.
So am I correct though that you want to go get more school? You want to go to school?
Yeah, I would like to get training. I'm looking at Bethlehem College and Seminary in Minneapolis. just to get more Bible training and training in the original languages of the Bible. That's so important to me.
Yeah.
And if God wants, we would love to, like with my boyfriend, who we might get married in the future, we would like to study together.
Right.
And whether that's there or somewhere.
And so he would want to come up here and study.
And then his call is China.
Okay.
It's Tibet. And I mean, he has a long way to go as far as language training. So if we would go to Bethlehem, he would have to learn English.
Right.
And that's not something he's...
Oh, so he doesn't know English.
Not completely, not yet.
So he has some work to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting, and I think one of the things that's exciting for me as a pastor is to hear the story and then be a part of this process, because I, speaking for the church, I mean, we want to help you with this however we can, and so as far as what's going on with you in the future and those things, keep us in the loop, definitely, because we want to be there for you and help you. And I just, one of the things that's remarkable about your story, and every story is unique, but how God took you and you were closed off to the world. That was the whole point, right? You didn't understand anything about the world when you left the colony, and that was by design. That you are in a community that is set apart from the world, and now you are going to the world. That's the call.
That's the biggest miracle, apart from regeneration.
It's crazy. So very excited to see what God is doing with you, and maybe we'll do an update when you come back from China or something. So, but we're out of time. So thank you so much.
If you would like to learn more about the Renewal Podcast or find past episodes, check us out on the web at renewalcast.com or visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/renewalcast. If you would like to learn more about Bethel Church, find other resources there, please visit the church website at bethelmbchurch.org or connect with us there on Facebook at facebook.com/BethelMBChurch. Now, Bethel Church exists to bring glory to God by promoting the joyful worship of Jesus Christ, both in our context and to the ends of the earth.